Guys, apparently Instagram likes videos, so I'm doing a cool video right now. Here's my daughter.
The world of rock had seen feuds before. Fiery interviews, bruised egos, a few insults thrown across decades of sound and fame, but nothing prepared fans for the storm that erupted when Roger Waters, the voice and bass of Pink Floyd, aimed his words at the one man almost every rocker respected, Ozzy Osbourne. His remarks, dismissing the Prince of Darkness as overrated and over-celebrated, rippled through every corner of the music industry like a cold wave.
It doesn't matter.
But I think
Ozzy Osbourne, who just died, bless him.
And in the middle of that uproar, one name rose above the rest: Brian Johnson. The unmistakable voice of AC/DC, a man who had spent his life carrying the fire that Ozzy helped ignite. It began like all controversies do, quietly. A clip, an interview, a few words said with careless confidence. Ozzy's a showman, not an artist, Waters had said. He's noise, flash, spectacle, rock's circus act. That one quote spread faster than any single note could travel, and the reaction was immediate. Fans of both bands flooded comment sections, dividing, arguing, defending. Some called it honesty. Others called it blasphemy. But for Brian, it wasn't just about opinion, it was about principle. He was in his rehearsal space when the call came. The same space where decades earlier, he'd rehearsed the first screams of Back in Black. Surrounded by amplifiers that smelled faintly of beer and burnt wires, he leaned over a tablet, scrolled through the clip, and frowned. For a moment, there was just silence, that heavy, pulsing kind that hangs before a storm breaks. Then he muttered, "Bloody hell," under his breath, shaking his head. When Brian finally spoke publicly, his words weren't angry. They were raw, grounded, and cutting in their honesty. Ozzy was a true original, he said. Whatever anyone thinks, he changed rock and roll forever. You can't just erase what he did with Black Sabbath or the impact of his solo career. His music inspired millions, including myself. That kind of legacy deserves respect, but behind that simple statement was something deeper, a brotherhood that could only be understood by those who had lived through the chaos of the 70s and 80s. Brian and Ozzy had shared stages, dressing rooms, smoke-filled after-parties where laughter and exhaustion bled together. They'd seen the world change around them. But one thing never changed: the bond between those who carried the spirit of rock on their backs. He wasn't a saint, Brian admitted in an interview days later, but neither were any of us. That's the point. Rock was never about perfection. It was about survival, about screaming back at the world when it told you to shut up. Ozzy was that scream. In pubs across London, in record shops across America, fans nodded along. Everyone had their own Ozzy story. The first time they heard War Pigs on vinyl, the night they saw him stagger on stage and somehow deliver a performance that felt like a prayer. Ozzy wasn't just a musician. He was a mirror to every broken, fearless dreamer who believed chaos could still be beautiful. Brian understood that better than anyone. I remember one night, he recalled, eyes distant as if watching the past unfold again. We were backstage at a festival in Germany. Ozzy was pacing, nervous as hell. He looked at me and said, "Mate, do you ever wonder if they'll still care when we're gone?" I told him, "If they don't, they never deserved us." He laughed so hard he nearly dropped his drink. Those words would echo in Brian's mind years later, long after the lights had dimmed and the headlines faded. Because that was Ozzy, always questioning, always human beneath the legend. And that's what made Waters' comments sting so deeply. To reduce a lifetime of art, struggle, and impact to a single insult was more than disrespect. It was erasure. The outpouring of support came fast. Rock icons, metalheads, even pop stars who grew up idolizing the Prince of Darkness posted tributes, memories, and defenses. Tony Iommi, Robert Plant, Gene Simmons all spoke up. But it was Brian's voice that hit hardest. Not because he shouted, but because he spoke like someone who'd been there. Ozzy didn't build his career on hype, he said during a televised interview that would later go viral. He built it on blood, sweat, and pain. You could hear it in every scream, every lyric. That's real. That's art. And if Roger Waters can't see that, maybe he's forgotten what rock and roll was ever about. The interviewer asked him if he thought Waters' comments came from jealousy. Brian smiled sadly. No, I think they come from distance. From forgetting. From sitting too long in the past and not realizing how much the world still moves because of people like Ozzy. We all owe something to the man who gave darkness a voice. Meanwhile, social media had turned into a battlefield. Hashtags like Harm Stand with Ozzy and Respect the Prince trended worldwide. Clips of Ozzy performing Crazy Train at Ozfest resurfaced, amassing millions of views overnight. Comment sections were flooded with fans writing stories about how Ozzy's music had saved their lives, given them courage, or simply made them feel less alone. Brian watched the storm from afar, refusing to fan the flames further. But the silence around him didn't last long. Calls poured in from news outlets, magazines, podcasts. Everyone wanted his follow-up, his next quote. Instead, he chose something else, a song. Late one night, he released a short clip online. It wasn't AC/DC, it wasn't even a full song. Just Brian in a dim room, strumming an old Gibson and singing the first few lines of Changes by Ozzy Osbourne. His voice cracked on the last word, but he didn't care. He ended with a whisper. Legends don't die. They echo. The clip went viral instantly. It wasn't rehearsed, polished, or filtered. It was raw, just like Ozzy. Fans flooded the comments, calling it the most emotional tribute they'd ever seen. One fan wrote, "You can insult a man, but you can't kill his influence." Another said, "Ozzy gave us permission to be loud when the world told us to be quiet." Roger Waters remained silent through it all. Some speculated he didn't care. Others said he realized he'd gone too far. But by then it didn't matter. The damage was done, and so was the resurrection. Ozzy's name, legacy, and music began trending across the globe again. Vinyl sales skyrocketed. Streams of Paranoid and Iron Man surged by millions overnight. For every insult Waters had thrown, the world had thrown back 10 times the love. Behind the scenes, Brian received messages from Ozzy's family. Sharon Osbourne called to thank him personally. "He'd be laughing his head off at all this," she said, her voice trembling somewhere between grief and pride. "You know how he was. Couldn't stay out of trouble even after death." Brian chuckled softly. "That's our Ozzy," he replied. That night, he sat on his balcony, watching the city lights blur into a sea of gold. Somewhere in the distance, he imagined the faint echo of a crowd chanting, "Ozzy, Ozzy, Ozzy." The sound made him smile. He knew that wherever the Prince of Darkness was now, he'd be smiling too, probably raising a glass and saying, "Told you they'd remember." But the story wasn't over. Not yet, because legends don't just fade. They transform into every voice that still dares to scream, every guitar that still dares to howl. And as long as artists like Brian Johnson continue to stand up, the spirit of Ozzy Osbourne, the chaos, the magic, the unbreakable rebellion, will never, ever be silenced. The storm didn't quiet down. If anything, it became louder, heavier, and more relentless. Roger Waters' controversial remarks about Ozzy Osbourne had ignited something far bigger than a mere disagreement. It had awakened the entire rock community. And when Brian Johnson spoke out, his words carried the weight of decades of brotherhood, respect, and defiance. But the wave of support for Ozzy didn't stop there. It grew, spreading from studios to stages, from interviews to social media, until even the quietest legends began to roar. Within days, several rock icons, from Metallica's James Hetfield to Aerosmith's Steven Tyler, joined the chorus. But it was one particular voice, a voice from within the Osbourne family itself, that truly silenced the noise. Amy Osbourne, Ozzy's eldest daughter and an artist who had always chosen privacy over fame, broke her silence. She rarely spoke publicly, almost never about family matters. But when asked in an interview about Waters' comments, she didn't hold back. Her tone was calm, but every word struck like thunder. "My father doesn't need anyone's validation," she said. He changed the landscape of music long before people like Roger were writing essays about artistic integrity. My father lived it. Every scar, every scream, every note. He was never pretending. That's something money, intellect, or ego can't replicate. The interviewer, visibly taken aback by her conviction, tried to follow up. But Amy leaned closer to the mic, her voice cutting sharper. "If you can't see what Ozzy Osbourne did for music, then maybe you were never listening to begin with." That clip, 22 seconds long, went viral in hours. Fans flooded comment sections calling it the most powerful Osbourne moment in years. Within days, even veteran musicians were quoting her. Slash from Guns N' Roses reposted it with the caption, "Respect where it's due," but the story was far from over. Roger Waters, seemingly unfazed, gave another interview, doubling down on his previous comments. He called Ozzy's success a spectacle rather than substance, insisting that Black Sabbath made noise, not art. That was the breaking point. Brian Johnson was asked again for his reaction, and this time he didn't mince a single word. That's rich, coming from someone who built his empire on division and bitterness. Ozzy's music united people. You'd go to a Sabbath concert and see misfits, outsiders, dreamers, all standing shoulder to shoulder, chanting the same words. That's art. That's human. His voice, roughened by decades of stage screams, carried a rare tenderness when he continued. Roger's a great musician, no doubt, but he's forgotten something important. Without connection, music is just noise. And nobody connected to people the way Ozzy did. Those words echoed across the industry. It wasn't just about defending Ozzy anymore. It was about defending what rock truly stood for: authenticity, rebellion, and raw emotion. Then came the moment that sealed it all. A tribute concert was quietly organized in Birmingham, Ozzy's hometown, by a group of musicians who felt the world needed to remember the man for what he gave, not what anyone said about him. The lineup was staggering. Brian Johnson, Tony Iommi, Geezer Butler, and even Lars Ulrich from Metallica showed up. No promotion, no press releases, just a gathering of those who owed their sound to a single man. As the lights dimmed, Brian Johnson stepped to the mic. His voice carried the room into silence. This isn't about revenge. This isn't about words thrown in interviews. This is about respect. For the man who showed us all that madness could be music. And then, without warning, the first notes of Paranoid ripped through the speakers. The crowd exploded. For those few minutes, it wasn't about headlines or controversies. It was about history. Footage from that night went viral. Fans across the globe wrote messages like "Ozzy forever" and "Rock still. Remembers its king." Even people who weren't born when Black Sabbath released their first record felt the power of that moment. Roger Waters didn't respond again. Not a word. Not a post. Silence. But the final nail in the coffin didn't come from anger. It came from grace. A few weeks later, Sharon Osbourne made a brief appearance on her talk show. With that signature composure that's carried her through decades of fame and fire, she smiled faintly and said, "You can throw stones at legends all you want, but legends don't crumble. They echo." It was simple, elegant, and devastatingly final. The rock world rallied behind her once more. Hashtags like Ozzy Forever, Prince of Darkness Lives On, and Respect the Legacy began trending. Even more surprising, young artists, from Billie Eilish to Post Malone, posted tributes, citing Ozzy as one of their biggest influences. The man who once terrified the establishment had become a cross-generational icon of endurance. Meanwhile, Brian Johnson continued to tour. During one of AC/DC's live shows in London, he paused mid-set and looked at the sea of fans. "This one's for my brother Ozzy. Wherever you are, the thunder's still rolling." The crowd roared so loud it drowned out the next guitar riff. That night, Johnson ended with Back in Black, but with a twist. A giant screen behind him showed old clips of Ozzy laughing, spinning, screaming into the mic, alive in every frame. It wasn't a memorial. It was a celebration. As the music world moved forward, Roger Waters' remarks faded into the noise of yesterday's outrage. His attempt to undermine a legacy had instead reignited it. Music journalists began publishing reflective pieces. How Ozzy redefined heavy metal's humanity, the immortal voice of madness. From rebellion to reverence. Even critics who had once dismissed him as the wild man of rock began acknowledging the genius behind the chaos. But for Brian Johnson, the whole ordeal left him with a single lasting thought, one he shared in a podcast months later. "When people talk about rock legends," he said softly, "they always think it's about who sang the loudest or played the fastest. But the truth is, legends are the ones who last." Ozzy lasted because he was real. He wasn't trying to be perfect. He was trying to be himself. And that's the hardest damn thing to do in this world. He paused, smiled to himself, and added, "Roger forgot that, but Ozzy never did." The host asked if he thought Waters would ever apologize. Brian chuckled. "He doesn't need to. The crowd already answered for him, And indeed they had. The very next week, at Download Festival, tens of thousands of fans gathered. During a quiet moment between acts, the giant LED screens displayed a simple black background with white letters. "There is no escape from now. Ozzy lives forever." The crowd erupted. Some cried. Others raised their hands in salute. And somewhere in that chaos, that beautiful, unified noise, the spirit of Ozzy Osbourne, the Prince of Darkness, echoed once more. His voice, timeless, wild, and unchained, seemed to whisper through the air, "Let the madness live on." The guitars screamed, the drums thundered, and for one fleeting perfect moment, rock and roll remembered exactly why it existed. Brian Johnson stood side stage, smiling. He didn't need to say another word. The world already knew, because legends don't die. They multiply, and as long as people still feel that spark, that jolt of rebellion, that whisper of freedom, somewhere out there, Ozzy is smiling too. The backlash may have started with anger, but it ended with unity. Roger Waters' words became nothing more than a footnote in the story of a man whose voice refused to fade. Because in the end, every note, every scream, every chaotic heartbeat belonged to one truth. There really is no escape from now, not when now still sounds like Ozzy Osbourne.